you might look at some of the pictures on Instagram of me ski mountaineering, and those days are so precise and so calculated that for me, it doesn't feel like a huge risk. It's taken me years and years of micro progressions to get to some of those places. And so for me, it always seems within my grasp. And so I try to take a lot of time and be mindful about those situations and the objectives that I pick for myself, because I want to make sure that those are within alignment for me as an athlete and within a place where it pushes me to grow and it's challenging, but it doesn't push so far that if I do it, I just got away with it. It's kind of living in a place of balance. And in order to kind of consistently be there, you have to design or have a lifestyle that promotes that. If I have a big day in the mountains, I will be very pointed in putting myself in a restful mindset, whether it's through meditation or just through relaxation or playing my guitar, whatever it may be. Cooking is another kind of place where I find, mindfulness and can kind of relax. And it starts with an awareness of that. And I think for me, really the basis that underlies all of this is meditation. And I've been meditating since I was 13 years old. I'm 33.
So that was TJ David, and he is this week's guest on the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. My name is Dr. Benjamin Alter. For those of you who don't know me yet, hello and welcome. So nice to be connected here and now. I'm a licensed naturopathic physician practicing holistic lifestyle medicine worldwide, all online. You can find out more and get yourself scheduled for a complimentary 15-minute exploratory consultation. Learn about how we can support you in achieving your health and your life goals through the power of a whole food, plant-based diet and mind-body medicine. So TJ, he is this week's guest on the Alter Your Health podcast. TJ is a professional mountain athlete, a plant-powered professional mountain athlete, I might add. And we talk about how his nutrition, how he fuels his body, and how that supports him in really achieving his fitness goals, his endurance goals, and that sort of thing. We talk about how he maintains balance in his life, which I think really, from my perspective at least, sets him apart from a lot of other people in the realm of mountain sports and ultra endurance events and that sort of thing. He's got a really kind of restorative, sense to himself, and he's takes really good care of himself holistically. We talk about his meditation practice that he's really had for 20 years that has supported him in his endeavors and his well-being. We cover a lot in this episode. I just want to, forewarn you, there were a couple times where I felt a little self-conscious. One was right off the bat where I mentioned how I Googled for a plant-based athlete in Carbondale, and TJ is all I found. And I didn't mean like TJ is all I found. I was looking for someone cooler, but TJ was all I found. I'm so pleased that TJ is all that I found, and he is a super cool dude, and I didn't mean that like I was hoping someone better would show up for the show. By no means. The other point was in some nuances around the plant-based diet. If I came across like I was maybe challenging TJ's decisions and how he was feeling himself on a higher fat, higher oil, plant-based diet. We talk about how he is burning thousands upon thousands of calories out there in the mountains, oftentimes in fat burning mode, and those oils are being put to use. I was really just trying to make the point that for the vast majority of humans who aren't burning thousands upon thousands of calories in fat burning mode, avoiding or limiting oils dramatically can be hugely helpful and supportive for all sorts of health conditions and weight goals and that sort of thing. Now that that's off of my chest, we can continue this introduction. I just want to give TJ a formal introduction by reading his brief little action-packed bio here. TJ is a certified holistic health and integrative nutrition coach, four-season professional mountain athlete, and endurance coach based in Carbondale, Colorado. As a four-season mountain athlete, he has had first ski descents in Norway, rare ski descents in Chamonix, France, and in Ecuador, and has appeared in Warren Miller films and has been published in every major ski publication worldwide, including Powder, Free Skier, ESPN, NBC Sports, and I'm sure more. By the way, for more content on TJ, you can visit his website, tjdavidski.com. You can see beautiful photos and videos that he has created and had created for himself that are really just breathtaking. Also, follow him on Instagram at TJ_skis, and you can stay up to speed with where he is in the world and all the beautiful stuff that he's doing outdoors. Really inspiring. Anyways, just to wrap up his little bio here, some more highlights. When snow isn't in the forecast, TJ enjoys participating in mountain ultra trail events and has twice set historic times at the Indian Creek's 55-kilometer Sky Ultra Race in Colorado. He's won the rugged Athens Big Fork Trail Marathon and set elite qualifying time in the 50-mile distance at the Dead Horse Ultra and won the U.S. Sky Ultra Series in 2018. As a lifelong mountain athlete, TJ now splits his time between his training and supporting athletes on their journeys through his coaching programs at Microcosm Coaching. We talk about that finally as well at the end of this episode. So, for more on TJ, visit his website, tjdavidski, and you'll learn about the Microcosm Coaching there as well. And also, like I said, give him a follow on Instagram. You'll be grateful that you did if you don't already, at TJ_skis. So with that said, lastly, before we dive in, just a reminder, if you haven't yet done so, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit the subscribe button, leave a rating or a comment, and send this to someone who you know and love, someone who maybe loves the outdoors, looking for a little shot of inspiration, a little dose of mindfulness to keep them grounded in their crazy, adventurous lives. This is a good one with TJ David. So let's put our feet on the ground, let's take a breath, and enjoy this conversation with TJ. All right, well, TJ, thank you so much for being on the Alter Your Health podcast. Welcome.
Thanks so much. This is great.
Yeah. Just to give you a little background of why you're here, like I just kind of briefly alluded to, I'm doing this kind of local series on the podcast. And when I started, I Googled plant-based athlete or something like that, Roaring Fork Valley, and you came up and like,
Nice.
and I did a lot of searching actually for other people. And I was like, this is like kind of the guy, it seems like. I know there's a lot of plant-based endurance athletes come into the scene, but I don't know, you had the Roaring Fork Valley covered, at least in that sense. So reached out and here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I love talking about all those things.
Cool. I definitely want to talk about the plant-based nutrition thing, how that fuels you in all of your endeavors. And I want to learn more about your endeavors, both kind of from a selfish personal place to learn more for myself. And also, I think we can all probably learn a bit about pursuing our passions and that sort of thing. But take us back to, the formative moments that put you on this path of, I don't even know, like, how would you define or label yourself in the outdoors, sports, endurance world?
As an athlete, I would consider myself a mountain athlete, and that kind of encompasses a few different disciplines. For example, skiing, which people primarily know me as a skier, and that's free skiing, free ride. That was kind of my background getting into things. But over the last maybe 4, 5, and even 6 years since relocating to Aspen, where I lived for 8 years before moving here to Carbondale, I made a shift from free ride and free skiing, which is, if you guys are familiar with that, it has a big mountain element where you're skiing backcountry lines, but you're maybe jumping off cliffs, you're skiing more powder, you're not necessarily skiing the terrain or going on longer adventures. It's generally shorter, more accessible from resorts. And when I moved here, I noticed that the backcountry was a lot less accessible in terms of bigger mountains and being able to get out into those mountains. It took a lot more effort. So over time, my focus shifted from resort accessible backcountry and free ride. And although I still love that kind of stuff today, my focus is more on the endurance side of skiing. And as a mountain athlete, I also prefer, adventures that involve kind of multi-discipline. So a lot of rope work, a lot of mountaineering elements, a lot of technical skiing, not as fast as free ride, more precise and more thoughtful.
Mm. Awesome. And I know that you are in the when there's not snow in the mountains, you're out there in other ways, mainly running, right?
Yes, I have started competitively running 4 years ago, and I've always used trail running since I moved to Aspen, maybe 2012, 2013. I got really into trail running as a way to train and be fit in the off season to kind of prepare myself for winter adventures. And that evolved over the last 5, 6 years into um, a parallel career to my ski career. And I actually have a coaching business now where I work with athletes, generally runners, generally distance runners. And that's been another element to kind of my program as an athlete. I'm now a coach, and I've been doing that for a year
Cool.
with my
Yeah, I
business.
came across that when I Googled you and I found is it Microcosm Coaching?
Correct.
Yeah, I want to learn more about what that entails. But like going back to kind of your journey as a mountain athlete, when did it really click that this was not like a hobby of yours and it was like your life? Because I think, pretty much everyone that lives in Colorado is a hobbyist mountain athlete in some sense. But when did you decide, like, oh, this is what I'm going to embrace as more of my life?
That's an interesting question. I don't think there is any one point that I can say this is when things changed, or when I went from being somebody who worked specific, like I worked at night and I skied during the day, and it went from hobby to career. But I do remember, when I received my first paycheck as a skier, and that was a pretty big deal, and it was, a $250 check, and it was supposed to help me out with gas money for a season. And this was in 2011 or something like that. And I remember, okay, I just got a check from skiing. Like, okay, I maybe this is something. Because I got my first sponsorships in 2009, 2010, and they weren't, I mean, it was a little bit of help with gear, free pair of skis, very small. So I think for me, my career kind of has evolved. And when I had, I would say, a very single pointed focus on freeride skiing, I didn't really realize how expansive like someone's career could actually be. So today, my career is very broad. I do different kinds of skiing. I do trail running. I do different distances of trail running, and I coach people. And that evolution, I don't think it started necessarily when I got that first paycheck, but it started around the time where I realized how much passion was important to have in your life. and how when you fill yourself up with things that have meaning and things that you're passionate about, generally your life has more flow and more sense of purpose. So there's less highs and lows in your life, and so I kind of wanted to fill myself up with those things, and then I started to prioritize those things, and skiing was that first thing for me.
That's awesome. So in 2011, what else were you doing where you're like, oh, this $250 check? Like, what was there a pivotal point like in your life? Were you pursuing a potential other career or interest, and then you're like, oh, maybe I'm gonna put more of my energy and passion into the skiing?
Yes, there. I actually was on the law school path, and I took when I got my undergrad. Uh, I took a year to kind of go through the process of taking the LSAT and preparing myself for law school, and I wanted a bit of a break from school. And throughout that process, I got my first sponsorships. I was competing on the free skiing world tour, which was a big mountain skiing competition tour that took place here in the States and a few competitions abroad. And I was into that. A lot of the guys that I was skiing with when I was living in Utah were into that scene too. And it kind of made sense for me to be a part of that. I was definitely mindful in the years leading up to that that was something I was interested in doing while I was kind of getting ready to go into this more traditional career. And I think that for me, the hard part was deciding I'm not really resonating with going to law school. I worked in a law firm when I was in college for several years, and a lot of the time I spent at the desk watching ski movies, kayaking movies, anything outdoor related. I didn't find the work challenging or as engaging as I thought I would, and so I spent a lot of time bored. Um, Not to say that it was easy, but it wasn't engaging for me, and it took a long time to come to the conclusion that you don't have to take a traditional route in life. Where I'm from, it's about having a career and a home and a family and providing for your family, making a living, maybe making as much as you possibly can in terms of, financial gains, and having the stability of a very good job and ascending in your career. Those are kind of societal norms where I'm from. So coming to terms with myself and saying that that's not maybe something that I want was a challenge. Actually, it took me a long time to have the courage to say to my parents I wasn't going to go to law school, and I wanted to maybe have a career in hospitality or work in restaurants so I could spend my days skiing and being outside.
That's awesome, and I'm glad that you bring this up because this, by the way, is a health podcast.
Yeah.
And sometimes we obviously get off on these really cool tangents that aren't, specifically quote unquote health related, but we talk in our practice and teaching all the time about like the importance of being aligned with our purpose for our health and well-being. And it's like, what's the point, really? You can do all of the things to create a healthy life for yourself, eat all the foods, do all the stuff, but if you have this constant low-grade chronic stress from misalignment in our lives, then it's like we're just sabotaging ourselves day after day. And I think that a lot of people come up with all the excuses in the book for, yeah, but, this, that, and the other. And it sounds like you made just had that aha moment, that light bulb moment early on when it was like, I know it's really important for me and I'm going after that. So that's pretty cool. I'm glad you brought that up.
I would agree, and I think we can bring that experience full circle to a more holistic and health, minded response as well. Because when you're, as you said, when you're pursuing things that have meaning to you, um, generally in the process of doing so, you fill yourself up with a lot of meaningful and experiences that have a lot of joy. And when those big picture things in your life are filling you up, I think that fuels general health and well-being, and can sometimes even override the more, I would say, not mundane, but maybe for some people, picking out like specific whole foods to eat during the day is a lot harder for some people than going to a job that gives them, a feeling of joy or creativity or contentedness. So I think those overarching principles are really important and maybe aren't necessarily highlighted enough when it comes to talking about health.
Totally. It's almost like the grease or lubricant that greases the wheels of life. If things are clunky and it's like, oh, we're dragging our heels and feet, then it really doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, I'm curious about your mountain athlete passion. Um, you know, as someone who is very much of a hobbyist, if that, in the realm of mountain athletics, uh, like for me, it's the fresh air, it's the trees, it's like the quietness. But for some of the stuff that you're doing or what it looks like you're doing on social media, there's like an element of risk. And do you feel that? Like, do you feel like you're kind of flirting on the edge of your safety? And is that like that exhilaration? Is that a part of it that keeps you hooked in what you're doing?
You know, I I get that question a lot, and I think that idea has evolved for me a lot. At first, it's a bit of a thrill to do something that seems risky or dangerous. Especially, from a free ride skiing perspective, it's about skiing a very difficult line, taking huge air, trying to take it to your feet, land, perform for the judges, all of these things. And there are definitely elements of, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try to push my body to that limit. And, I think at first that's kind of, there's like a bit of maybe glamour in that or some sense of maybe you're trying to impress people with it or to show off that you're good. I'm not sure, like looking back at the at times where I skied that way, I've always felt like it was maybe not necessarily skiing for myself because something always told me when you're taking that risk, is it really worth it? And for, a few $100s, it's not worth it. Anyone who's listening to this, don't put yourself at risk. It's not, you can have a very fulfilling life without, living on some kind of adrenaline rush or adrenaline high. And I think it's interesting. Like you might look at some of the pictures on Instagram of me ski mountaineering, and those days are so precise and so calculated that for me, it doesn't feel like a huge risk. It's taken me years and years of micro progressions to get to some of those places. And so for me, it always seems within my grasp. And so I try to take a lot of time and be mindful about those situations and the objectives that I pick for myself because I want to make sure that those are within alignment for me as an athlete and within a place where it pushes me to grow and it's challenging, but it doesn't push so far that if I do it, I just got away with it. It's more of within this kind of very specific and concise progression. And so I don't think that the risk taking really fuels my adventures. It's more of the aesthetic, the place that I want to go. And sometimes it takes me years to even consider an objective because there's so many other parts that have to occur before it.
Mhm. Well, I think something that I'm, not knowing you all that well, a lot of people in that realm of, in your a lot of your colleagues out there, they seem to me, from my perspective, like a little bit more intense and thrill seeking than you are. Maybe like there are a lot of people who are, both on like the ultra running perspective, like they're just racking in the miles, more the
Yeah.
better. But you have this more balanced approach, or so it seems from my perspective. Like you're resting and eating as much as you're training. And one thing that I want to talk about for sure is the hashtag that you use: eating is training and resting is training, right? Like, so you've got this awareness of the balance in it all, whereas I think a lot of your colleagues out there on the mountains are just like more faster, higher, and just pushing the limits.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too much about what other
Yeah.
people are doing, and I can't really account for kind of their behavior or their goal setting or what they're trying to achieve as athletes. And I don't really, and I think this is a perspective that's evolved for me over a lot of years, but I'm not really striving that hard. I'm not looking for achievement necessarily as much as I'm looking for contentedness and honoring where I am today and kind of taking a mindful moment to say, there's where I was, here is where I am now, where might I be going? That's unknown. So I'm trying to let things unfold as they're supposed to without forcing. And it's one thing that I've seen a lot in my travels as an athlete, going to places where there's a very competitive nature to the ski mountaineering, or at races, or with working with athletes, where there's a very competitive and like almost an ethos of com- comparing one person to another. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare one journey to another, because each person approaches their goals for themselves in a different way, from a different perspective, a different headspace. And I like that you mentioned balance, because that's very important to me. That's kind of where I everything should start, from the center. In my mind, I try not to live on highs, and I try not to live on the lows. I try to just kind of ride the middle ground, and I think some people are confused by that when it comes to understanding me.
Yeah,
But
talk more about what that is, riding the middle ground, and then maybe like how you do that or execute that.
well, I would say that I guess conceptually, it's kind of living in a place of balance, and in order to kind of consistently be there, you have to design or have a lifestyle that promotes that.
Well, so, my like the first thing that came to mind was like, okay, a 4-hour ski mountaineering trip, that means sitting on the couch for 4 hours. Or like, is that like, what does the balance mean? What's the equation that you have for yourself, and how do you know, equal out the scale?
I mean, you're right in a way. If I have a big day in the mountains, I will be very pointed in putting myself in a restful mindset, whether it's through meditation or just through relaxation or playing my guitar, whatever it may be. Uh, Cooking is another kind of place where I find, mindfulness and can kind of relax. And it starts with an awareness of that. And I think for me, really the basis that underlies all of this is meditation. And I've been meditating since I was 13 years old. I'm 33. That's a lot of time
Yeah,
meditating.
probably
So
more time meditating than any other 33-year-old.
maybe it's
Yeah.
changed my views, and
Mm.
it's changed, I think, some of my chemistry as well. And it allows me not to like move so far from the center a lot of times. And even if things are somewhat chaotic around me, I can usually kind of maintain my balance. And I think that underlies a lot of my decision making, a lot of my approach.
For sure. I would imagine that, with that, I like to use the word reference point. Like the meditation practice provides like this reminder of a reference point of our inherent peaceful center,
Yeah.
and the more we are familiar with that, like the easier and more effortless we can come back to that, even, skiing down a cliff or whatever. It's like, rather than having this hangover from the exhilaration or hangover from the low mood or grief or whatever it is.
Hmm.
We just have this kind of buoyancy and resilience to come back to who we are.
Yeah, and I think I've tried to use kind of similar language with the athletes that I coach, the people that I coach who are interested in using meditation as athletes to kind of help with training or to rest very constructively and lower cortisol, histamine, stress hormone, those kind of things. And it's interesting in the way that you described it. I think that if you lose your focus, you come back to the middle, and that kind of can happen in any point of your life, right? But if you have mindfulness over your center and you've practiced that, I mean, it's something that you practice whether you don't just use meditation for stress management, you also use it in the times where you're not stressed because you want to have an awareness of what that spectrum feels like. So if you are, for example, elevated because you've just skied a difficult line and there were some elements of risk and you were feeling those things, you have a strong awareness of feeling those things. For somebody, I think, who doesn't spend a lot of time balanced, they may only have an awareness of feeling elevated and not necessarily know how that relates to another point on the spectrum. And that's one of the ways that I achieve balance. And I think people think it's funny, even sometimes Zoe thinks it's funny, where I'll go out on a big day of skiing and I'll say all I want to do is relax this weekend, and I'm going to do my run and get my run in, my miles in, and then I just want to just chill out. And some people are very go and don't understand that, but as you said, for me sometimes that is like that constructive rest, shutting down the mental emotional side of things and the physical side of things is really important, I think, for sustainability.
Totally. Yeah, I'm with you, even though I'm not putting in nearly as many miles as you probably ever, but I did, however, and I want to talk about this with you maybe offline here. Thinking about registering for my first ultra, so moving in that direction. But going back to you, and you said 13 years old you started meditating. What was that impetus, and how and why? And yeah.
My neighbor, he's just a really amazing person, and he helped me out with that when I was young because I had some anxiety, some nervousness. I've been an athlete like my whole life. I was always nervous. I played tennis in college, and I played tennis a lot as a junior, like as a kid, to get to that place. And so, playing a lot of matches growing up, I would just lose constantly because I'd be so nervous that I just couldn't really play up to my potential because nerves got in the way. And I think that was kind of the driving place where my neighbor, who's a psychologist, he was really familiar with these techniques and I had no idea about them, and he just helped me to learn to breathe,
Mm.
and having an awareness of breath was like boom, a game changer for me. And I think as a young kid at like 13, 14, I would be nervous before tests, I'd be nervous in social situations, and having the awareness of like how to breathe, like inhalation, exhalation, like what that feels like. And he never like filled me in with the science or like what that does to your system,
Mm.
and the things that we know now with regard to meditation. But it was very helpful, and that awareness of breath like never left me. Even though meditation at times there are periods where I'm not meditating as much as I was. I think meditation is one of those things where over the period of 20 years, you have stretches where I would meditate every day for 6 to 8 months,
Mhm.
period. Like no, without any, like
Yeah,
that was very
religiously.
structural,
Yeah.
very habitual, very religious. Yeah, in a way. Um, and then there'd be times where I would only meditate once a week. It just depends, but I would always have because he gave me a baseline. I had awareness of my breath starting. at an early age, and that's helped me. That's helped me so much.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I love how you simplified it. And I mean, a lot of people can make meditation as complex as we want to, but the breath piece, and it sounds like kind of so silly, but we're talking about it all the time. Remembering how to actually breathe for
Yeah,
our well-being, not just like ventilate and use air to create energy in our body, but actually breathe to modulate our nervous system and stuff. And it's such a lost and forgotten, simple, accessible thing. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And then, so from 13 to 33, just briefly bring us through the evolution of your meditation mindfulness practice. I trust you're using your breath awareness and that sort of stuff, but any other kind of techniques specifically that support you?
sure. I think visualization has been really important. One of the techniques that I was taught, when I was younger, and I've used on and off my whole life, has been while kind of taking those centering breaths, maybe taking a moment to close your eyes and kind of come to a place where you are aware of your emotions in that moment. Like, am I feeling nervous? What does that feel like? Is it something in my chest? Is it a nauseating feeling in my stomach? Where is that stress? Where is that anxiety, nervousness? And in closing my eyes and visualizing when I like inhale where that is, and then just exhaling it out and really visualizing that process. And I think those were the most early forms of meditation for me. And it's just so simple. I think it takes just a few minutes, and a lot of people have the wrong idea sometimes about meditation, that it's really about clearing your mind completely, and I think that that's not necessarily true. For meditation, in a sense, there are many different ways to do it, of course, but for me it started as a way to build awareness around what my body was telling me, and how those emotions like were making me feel. And so it's really interesting as things evolved. I remember specifically in college tennis matches having these moments where the match was very close, could go either way, and I'm watching like these beads of sweat come off, like, and drop down like really slowly to the ground in slow motion when I'm breathing, and like I could literally slow my world down to like a, where a second pat like seems like 1 or 2 minutes, and just becoming so relaxed that I could play with ease. And I rarely lost the match because of that, because I could become more relaxed than my opponent. Or I use this stuff a lot in athletic um, or academic setting. And then when I got into my early 20s, I started being more interested in like different spiritual practices, and just reading about meditation and how that was could be combined with philosophy, with religion. Those are interests of mine. And I it's so easy to go on YouTube. Even 10 years ago, you could go on YouTube and find a guided meditation. And once I realized that there was guided meditations with imagery, and that really changed my practice a lot. So it became something that went from like very in the moment, or in the privacy like of at home, in the shower, wherever, where I have a minute to myself. Now it was like, I'm really going to sit down and do this for an hour. And I think that's actually, I felt for myself there's profound changes there after long periods of time, because of the consistency of being in those relaxed states. It was honestly is life changing. So I have all elements of the practice that I've just described. Still, I do all of that as relates to skiing or running in preparation for things. But I love the grounded nature of some parts of my meditation practice.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. I know it's a total personal thing, and you know, I actually kind of call myself a recovering meditator
Yeah.
because I took it so seriously for so long that it kind of brought me in this weird place where it just became a habit like any other, not a mindfulness practice, interestingly enough. So, just to, for me, it's a reminder to bring mindfulness to meditation or anything else. And I think a lot of people are relating to it nowadays in a way like just something else to check off their list and put on their calendar and squeeze into their busy day. And it sounds like you are mindful. You're not like you're mindful always. You're mindful when you're meditating. Your intention is to be mindful when you're skiing and all this stuff. And you're not compartmentalizing and choosing when you're showing up mindfully because it's who you are.
That's a very nice way to describe it. I wouldn't maybe describe myself as 100% mindful. I
Well,
think
not
that
well, you're human too, I
yeah,
hope.
yeah, yeah. I just am doing my best. I
Yeah,
feel good about where I am,
yeah,
and I know that there's always progress to
totally.
be made.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should take the shift into the eating is training category of the
Cool.
conversation. Talk about how your food fuels you in your endeavors, and yeah, take us back just to when the light bulb went off that you felt better eating plants and how that kind of change happened in your lifestyle.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think to make a long story short, the biggest difference for me in terms of, health and well-being happened when I gave up eating dairy. And that was not an easy thing for me to approach. That was really difficult, giving up some of my favorite, I would say, ski related foods like pizza after a day of skiing or breakfast burritos before skiing. I think those things held a special place in my kind of my memory, and it was very associated to the kind of passions that I have. And when I finally started to give up dairy, is I was vegetarian, pescatarian, exploring different things. This was like 2014, maybe. This is quite a while ago now, 2015, when I, became vegan. And it was weird. I never really noticed, red meat having an effect on me. But when I really gave up the dairy, when I gave up cheese, I never drank milk, never liked it, always thought it was weird. But when I gave up eating cheese, I stopped feeling so lethargic. And perhaps something in my microbiome, things weren't aligned, and that particularly dairy didn't work for me. So I did notice a huge difference. I was able to recover better, and I was more energetic. So I was more willing to go out on longer days when it came to ski mountaineering or ski touring or trail running, and that really set like an amazing baseline for me. And that wasn't something that happened overnight. That was me really having to be self-regulated and reinforcing, and also when I would get off track to give myself grace, say that doesn't make me any more or less of a vegan. I'm still kind of, it's all about progress and not trying to be something perfect because that's impossible, and just kind of evolving with it to a place where nutrition and being aware of nutrition and how that works into my day, how it works with my athletes, that kind of thing evolved from all of that, from giving up dairy, and the fact that it made me feel better, much better.
Yeah, I know a lot of people say, oh, you're not lactose intolerant, you're just not a baby cow. Like, and something like 80% of humans are lactose intolerant because like dairy is not a natural food for humans to be consuming, or at least in any sort of consistent, regular way. Yes, but and it's so freaking everywhere and addictive and uh, delicious. Like you kind of brought up, it's and how it is associated with all of those pleasurable things that you also associated with your skiing. So was it a cold tofu sort of thing, or was it just pizza on the weekends for a while, or because I think that I don't know. I'm always trying to figure out myself which is best to kind of wean off or to just like flip the switch and go cold tofu.
You know, I it's hard for me to say. I think it was a little bit of both, quite honestly. It was it's very situational, I think, in my experience, because I travel fairly often for skiing and or for running, and that puts me in places where I'm unfamiliar what people are eating around me, maybe with people who don't know what my food preferences are. And so being able to give myself some grace in situations where the food option is extremely limited, but the necessity for me to eat calories is, at the top of the priority list, and being able to say, okay, today, I don't have control over this situation, and I can let go of my need to be vegan and eat because I need food no matter what in order to fuel myself for what I have planned for tomorrow. So I think things are very situational for me, and kind of, I would say, in I can be very self-regulated. So it's not hard for me to say I'm not eating cheese. That wasn't an issue. But being in a place, maybe traveling to South America, where a lot of dairy is consumed and a lot of red meat is consumed, makes it very difficult as a traveling athlete in those cultures, in those places, to eat the diet I want. So being able to say, okay, I know that could affect me and my performance, but not eating or eating just a salad is going to be far worse, because to be in the mountains for 8, 9, 10 plus hours and to be up high at altitude, all that stuff really requires calories in the end. And although the body, I think, does differentiate between calories, and there are um, calories that are a lot better for you than others. In the end, you need some kind of fuel. So I give myself grace in those situations. I've actually become way better in the last 2 or 3 years at traveling and being more prepared for those situations, and being an advocate for my own diet and my own dietary preferences, so that in those situations I feel more confident to say, "Hey, what else do you guys have?"
Totally. Yeah, because there are always options. I mean, maybe not always, always, always. I'm sure you've been places where there's not other options, but generally speaking, I think that, I think a lot of people don't want to cause a ruckus or, be a nuisance. So, but then again, like more and more people all over the world are waking up to the power of a plant-based diet and health and performance. Um, so kind of diving into the nuances of a plant-based diet, we know that vegan just doesn't equate to healthy, especially in our world today. There's a lot of processed junk. When you're going out and you like, say you're preparing for a race and want to actually be fueling your body optimally, walk me through what your choices are, what your plate looks like, what the ingredients are. If you get into the macros, which I don't really care about, but if that matters to you, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take it as if, if today I was preparing for a long race tomorrow, my diet would be pretty specific, actually. Especially if I'm home in the comfort of my own house and able to make choices based on what I have in my cabinet, in my pantry. Um, for me, it's actually, in terms of the macros, I lean a little bit heavier on the healthy fats. For me, I find them to be a bit more sustaining, and toward in an idea of being satiated and not being hungry often, because I'm burning thousands of calories like every single day, and it's on a plant-based diet. It can be challenging for me to not run a deficit, but if I run a deficit, it can be very detrimental to my training and to my health and actually my mental emotional state too that I've found. So I lean a lot on avocados. Extra virgin olive oil is something that I'm always cooking with, or unrefined coconut oil. And I tend to be pretty liberal with those things. There's a few things that never change with my diet. I always eat greens. I eat greens 6 out of 7 days a week, if not 7 for 7. And that's a massive salad with dark leafy greens, usually avocados and tomatoes. And we'll make, I don't know, some vegan Caesar dressing or just olive oil with salt and pepper. It just depends on the day and what else we're eating. But carbohydrates are also really important. I think a lot of people, at least for athletes, there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years. Oh, you should be fat adapted. That's better if you're an endurance athlete. I think possibly if you're just a ski mountaineer, being fat adapted, or just a mountaineer, that could be great, because when you're at those certain heart rates, you tend to burn more fats in the mix of what your metabolism is doing. So your metabolism is always burning a mixture of carbohydrates and fats. Depending on where your heart rate is, that will change. So you're at really high intensity, sugar is feeding your system carbohydrate. If you're at lower heart rates, you tend to be burning fats. Since I'm racing, carbohydrates are really important for me because I need to have top end speed. I need to be able to move quickly with agility on command. I can't just constantly kind of be, especially for the racing I do, which is kind of shorter ultras, like 50K primarily. I need to be able to move past another runner if it's a competitive situation, or move up and over a hill or through different terrain. So that's a lot of that is fueled with sugar because my heart rate is up and it's going to be up for a little while before it comes back down. Favorite carbohydrates, I think before a race, I'm big into sweet potatoes. I eat, a lot of sweet potatoes. I eat a lot of different grains. Not a huge into quinoa, so other stuff. I go with like whole wheat pastas sometimes, even because they don't have a lot of fiber. And that's not necessarily great for your diet to not have a lot of fiber, but it is good before a race because too much fiber when you're working at high intensity can create some disbalance in your gut. And that kind of discomfort can hurt your race performance. So I try not to eat too much fiber. So I would like never eat some staples of my diets or tons of beans and different kinds of beans. And I wouldn't eat those before a race purely because that could affect how I feel. Any GI distress can be terrible in a trail race. But before a big ski mountaineering day, I wouldn't be as concerned about that because my heart rate's just not very high.
Cool. Yeah, cool. There's yeah, I definitely want to talk more. It's a little bit not quite aligned with how I eat and how I recommend eating, but you're out there, like you said, pumping through thousands upon thousands of calories every day. And your choice for oils, is that, when you're thinking about that, is that purely to get more calories into your diet? Because oil is like 120 calories per tablespoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's an easy way to get more calories, and it's an easy way to get healthy fats.
Yeah. What's healthier than an oil is the whole food, but
Yeah.
no one's gonna be chowing down on coconuts and olives all day to get that level of fat that you could easily get from a couple tablespoons of oil. um, so that's cool. And that's really, and I'm my wheels are turning in my brain here because I'm like starting to run more, starting to think about races and pushing myself a little bit differently. And the whole like fiber intake, have you experienced, like I trust that you have experienced the consequences of like, oops, I ate beans before this race, that didn't work out well?
Yeah, fortunately, I've been able to kind of skirt a lot of race day issues, but in a race that I just did in Moab in early winter, late fall, is a 50-mile race. The first 25 miles of that, I was just very unsure of my like digestive situation, and it was most certainly because I ate um, something that I probably shouldn't have had the night before, whether it
Mm,
was whatever they were using in the kitchen at the restaurant I was at, something just wasn't quite right and I could feel it. I think that's the one thing that's really interesting. When you eat a certain way for a long time, you end up becoming pretty sensitive to things that are foreign. And I would say that for me, that can happen, although hasn't a lot, thankfully, because I feel like I've had a good grasp on like what's appropriate before a big training run or a high intensity
right.
workout. I've had a good grasp on that. So that's kind of saved me a little bit of the trial and error. And I think what I haven't always had a good grasp on is like how to always recover with food.
Mm,
I think that plant-based foods tend to be so nutrient dense and not as calorically dense as animal products. And I'm not speaking about the processed foods, I'm just whole foods.
totally.
Um, that for me, I tend to fill up, and the water content can be really high too. So I tend to fill up pretty quickly on plant based foods, which inadvertently may leave me calorie deficient. So
Absolutely.
when you mention, okay, there's a lot of calories in oils, but it's not a whole lot of volume of food, and
Yeah,
you'd be like astonished at the volume of food that I can eat, and it's not always even enough.
totally. No,
Um,
I think that that's the one biggest pitfall for most people who go to a plant-based diet is calorie deficit, not getting enough because they're used to, I mean, we talk about it all the time, like a veggie burger and a meat patty, it's like a third of the calories.
yeah,
And but it looks the same and you're served at the restaurant, it's like, "Oh, this is what I should eat," but you're left, all things, everything else being equal, you're left in a calorie deficit, and that over weeks, months, then it's like, oh, this plant-based diet actually isn't good for me because I feel tired. Well, turns out just that veggie burger and all those low calorie, nutrient dense foods, just you need more of it.
yeah, and I've kind of worked very hard to become more mindful of what exactly I need,
Mm,
and so when I'm not feeling super hungry, um, I know that I need to eat more, so I'll make a concerted effort to try to add calories to my meals, whether it's instead of, necessarily using just olive oil on my salad dressing, I'll make a tahini salad dressing that incorporates olive oil as well. So I have some kind of fats
double
from the
down on the
sesame
fats.
seeds. And I mean, those things for me really
Yeah.
made a difference.
Yeah.
Putting more nut butters, almond butter in my granola in the morning makes a difference for me. When
Oh
I
man.
don't put as much nut butter, when I'm not liberal enough with it, I feel the consequences of it. And that doesn't work for everybody. I think everybody is kind of should be intuitive to their own microbiome or their own individual self. Like my eating habits aren't going to be the same
Mm,
as yours or anybody else's necessarily, even other plant-based athletes. And there's quite a number of plant-based athletes, but I think it's kind of having an understanding of what works for you, and then really being mindful of and self-regulated in the process of like, I need to eat,
mm,
and what's how do I optimize this plate,
mm.
and doing that consistently and having the consistency of that.
Yeah. How about eating before training? Because I know I saw a post that you made about not training in a fasted state. Um, this was hard for me because I usually wake up and then I want to go do my movement and then I want to eat. And obviously, I'm not going to go out and do a 20-mile run or anything right out of bed before a meal. But where do you like draw the line for that fasted exercise being too much of a stress for your system?
It depends, and there's a lot of coaches who are going to ask athletes to train fasted because they, in their minds, think that it's important for you in order to develop a better aerobic metabolism where you're burning more fats. It's more sustainable over time if in a long race if you're burning primarily fats. So that's kind of where that line of thinking comes from. But it's actually extremely dangerous for an athlete to train fasted. It can be really, really bad, especially for women who aren't, susceptible to bone density issues, and at altitude, susceptible to a low iron. And you see a lot of people with stress fractures and things like that as a result of those practices over time. So for me, I won't train fasted. I've tried.
Like zero. You won't
Period.
Period.
Yeah. Zoe won't either. I think that's just really smart if you care about your longevity as an athlete. Don't take shortcuts. Even if it's just a small bowl of granola, and 30 minutes before you go for a run, or even better is an hour. So you have a little time to get that through your digestive system, especially if you're doing an intense workout. But it is important to have some fuel in there. And then you can recover with a bigger meal after. Depending if you're going to have a second workout in that day, you might want to have more carbohydrates in that recovery meal, so your glycogen stores are full again to fuel another workout. And if you're not, you might want to have a little bit of more protein, although probably most people's diets are not deficient in protein. So that's something that people overemphasize.
Totally. Cool. Well, you definitely have me considering getting some meal in before I go out for a run in the morning. I'm just so used to it. I'm so used to it. I can't imagine running around with stomach full, but like you said, it doesn't have to be your full meal. It's just something.
Yeah. And I would recommend if you're kind of one of those people who doesn't metabolize that quickly, you might just want to eat a little bit lighter, but eat something. Because the worst possible thing, and we deal with this with our athletes, is people who report back, I was hungry during my run. Okay, well, that's, a sign that you're not satiating yourself. You're not eating enough. And over time, patterns of that can be self-destructive. Like they can hurt your ability to achieve the goals that you've set for yourself. So we really try to emphasize, all right, you should eat before you run. Everybody's on a different time management schedule, and they're putting their runs in at specific times when they can during their day. It's important to, even if it's, I don't like to say eat a power bar or the equivalent of that to a lot of people, because I don't eat those things. And I think that eating processed foods isn't really optimal. But if that's what you have time for and what you can tolerate before a run, and a lot of that's trial and error, please do that, because having something is going to be better over time than having had nothing.
Yeah. My go-to trail food is like dates.
Yeah. Cool.
Just sugar, boom. Sugar with a little minerals, fiber. Well, this is interesting because I recently was listening to Dean Karnanzas, ultra marathon man, and he's a different type of animal, I guess, because he'll talk about going out for a 50-mile run, on a fast, then just not eating after until dinner. Just, he's on like this crazy. I think he's like a different type of animal. I don't know.
It's possible. I think there's always outliers. Kilian Jornet is an example of that. And I think that his success in limited fueled workouts.
Who's that?
He's got the speed ascent record on Everest, a number of other peaks. I believe he's climbed all seven summits at this point. Pretty much the greatest ultra runner out there. And I think there's always outlier cases like that, but I often wonder if people who train that way leave a lot of their potential on the table because they're underfueled, and maybe get away with it through over caffeination or other means of feeling energetic, and maybe don't, kind of to take it back to what we were talking about before, but don't seem to just have sustainable energy ride the middle. They maybe more go from highs and lows. I can't really speak to the experiences of those guys, but I kind of imagine that's what I would feel like if I didn't do things in the way that I do them.
Yeah. And I think, bringing it back to like, I think why you're sitting here and not those guys, because you've got this kind of healthy relationship with your activities, your body, and it's not just pushing your limits. It's about like, feeling good, feeling yourself, maintaining that balance, that well-being, and not just like seeing how high you can go and how fast you can do it. And I think that's like I'll listen to David Goggins or whatever, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like he's putting out this message, and I think a lot of people want to hear it for whatever reason, but I don't think it's healthy.
I agree.
Yeah.
I could go on and on about how David Goggins isn't somebody that anyone should look up to, or really, I don't think he's a great role model for people, because I think that he projects something that society thinks is tasty.
Exactly.
Like this,
he's got like kind of this sexy, like just macho.
And it's a very all-in approach, at all costs approach. And if you know a little bit about his story, you know what he's dealt with because of that. It's a lot of injuries. It's things that are terrifying to
but that
to
makes
hear
him
about.
Stronger.
I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
But in my mind, strength is sustainability, longevity, trying to feel good as often as possible.
Totally.
And making that something consistent, not just going for things in order to tell people that you've done them. Making sure that the things that you do are in line with your values is something important. I don't know David personally, but I've listened to his podcast he's been on. I'm familiar with his story, and I try not to direct my athletes to that narrative, because I think that it doesn't promote sustainability or long-term growth.
Cool. Glad we're on the same page there.
Yeah, that's good.
That's cool. Well, like that kind of points us into your coaching practice, which you brought up a little bit earlier. And this is relatively new for you in the last year, you said?
Yeah, I started the business I've been coaching and working with people for like 2 years, but on a very limited basis. And a year or so ago, I really opened up a space for athletes, and then started a company.
What do you mean you opened up a space? Like in your calendar, or like
in my mind?
In your mind,
where I could support, where I wanted to really go in and support people. Because I think that it's not just saying, okay, I have the tools to coach somebody. It's also kind of having the mental and emotional channel open to be able to work with individuals, and me personally holding space for them, and in whatever way that they want to use that space, in a training sense. And my training is more holistic, because to go back to what we talked about before, I talk a lot about the overarching things in life with people, healthy relationships, food, a good relationship with food, in whatever way that works for you as an individual, incorporating training and time management, meditation, and how that looks as a holistic and mindful kind of way to approach goal setting and training.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, based on our conversation thus far, I would trust that your coaching is very unique. And so what the majority of your clients that you're working with, what are they doing? Are they mainly runners doing ultras, or is it kind of like everything?
Well, primarily we work with runners, any ability level, really. We really love working with beginners, and we also love working with people who are, I don't know, been doing it for a long time, or trying to push their potential in competition. I think it kind of rounds out a spectrum where we're not just searching for one type of athlete. We want to be approachable and open to all ways to use endurance sports and incorporate them in someone's life, in your life, whoever the athlete is that we're working with. And it's something where we found the most interest through running, but I've worked with triathletes, I've worked with ski mountaineers, I've worked with mountaineers as well, or people who do a combination of all those things, and I try to incorporate them as best as possible. I'd say our strongest foundation is in running.
Cool. And have you been coached? Have you been coached in your endeavors? Or has there been a specific role model for you?
Sure, I've had a lot of coaches over the years. When I was when I was competing in college tennis, um, my college tennis coach was a big influence on me. I still cite a lot of his ideas about preparedness in my own coaching. And currently, I'm coached by David Roche, who's a really great trail running specific coach. And he's really like kind of mentored me in my own coaching practice, which it's just been very helpful.
That's awesome. So I've never worked with a coach. So what I imagine is like a training plan, run this amount of miles, do this amount of recovery. What else is involved in like a coaching relationship?
I think those are definitely elements to the relationship. I would say even more so are developing a relationship between the coach and the athlete. I try to provide a space where the athlete can articulate things that, he or she are feeling about not just the workout, but of like overarching stressors in life, mental, emotional, familial,
Mm-hmm.
maybe dietary, things of that nature, where they can articulate what they're feeling and how that relates to the training. For me, that's a special and important component, and that's something that's done every day through, we use a shared log where if you were to train today and run 4 miles, you would let me know how those 4 miles felt. You wouldn't just tell me you ran 4 miles at 7:30 pace. It took you 30 minutes with 60 feet of elevation change. You would also tell me, I had a great day. I did a podcast and I worked around the house. Stress was a little higher because there was a snowstorm. I don't know. It would be something like
Mm-hmm.
that where I'd
Mm-hmm.
get a better understanding of everything that was going on, because I want to account for more stress than just the physical nature of the training provides you. I want to also be mindful of the fact that stress comes from other areas of your life and the two can directly affect each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's too much training stress, you may not be able to handle some of the overarching life stresses that you have, professional with a job, etc., family, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. If you're too stressed in that department, it could negatively affect the training. So it's important to find a balance between and symmetry between those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually meant to. I had this thought earlier in the conversation, but I didn't bring it up. Like, I think a lot of people use running and activity and exercise as like a stress management tool. What are your thoughts on that? What's your relationship with that? Because there's a lot of ultra athletes who, for example, are ex addicts or whatever, recovering addicts, and just kind of channeling that in passion in a different way. Um, what are your thoughts on that matter?
It's interesting how you put that, because I think that in terms of maybe ex addicts working in a training program like that I provide, for some of those people, that addictive personality translates right over to training, and they can be a more difficult athlete to coach because it's harder to get them to understand that there's a balance in training, and that doing a lot, like the David Goggins approach, doing the most possible, is not usually the best approach. The training needs to be structured, and kind of you need to adhere a little bit to, not a little bit, but you should adhere to what's prescribed. I think that those individuals also, though, are very consistent. They always show up, and that's a really important part of training. So finding the balance between, this is like just an extension of my addiction, or this is also something that I'm being mindful in how I approach this space. We don't really want our training to be therapy, but it can be therapeutic. It's nice to have a space to articulate things you're feeling. I really don't ask my athletes to put any kind of sensors or blocks on what they want to talk to me about. Whether or not those things are within my professional capacity to deal with is one thing or another. And actually, what we've been working really hard to do with Microcosm Coaching is develop a community where individuals support each other and where we have resources like therapists, like physical therapists, got people who want to do strength related coaching, where we have those individuals available to our athletes. Because I think that, a coach, although I can and I've been trained in a lot of this stuff, I'm not a therapist and I don't think running is therapy. I think it can be an amazing space for introspection, for listening, especially exploring like and listening to body feedback, to kind of have an awareness of how you're doing overall and where that relates, in the whole view of who you are. Because everything kind of has, it's like people are a bit of a puzzle, and each thing kind of fits in a certain spot. And it's good to have a way to understand how those pieces work together. Um, but I think, and it's seen a lot in trail running and endurance sports, where running can become a replacement for therapy. We we don't promote that. I don't think that that's sustainable for anybody who may need therapy. Both Zoe and I mentioned Zoe a lot because she's my co-coach in this, and my partner, and she has been instrumental in the development of the business. So a lot of the philosophy and ideas we both share. And when we're working with our athletes, we go through this stuff. And actually, she wrote a really cool article for Trail Runner about, the difference between working with a therapist and using running as a space for therapy. And it's a very deep conversation that I don't feel like I have all the capacities to articulate exactly, maybe what a counselor or psychologist would be able, how they would be able to explain that. But I think, and I hope that running is a tool in someone's toolbox, in a broader sense, that kind of brings passion and meaning to an individual's life in whatever sense that makes, in like whatever way that fits in for that person.
Yeah, I like what you said about running being therapeutic, though not replacing therapy, because it's like, yeah, if someone needs to talk with someone, then and there's nothing wrong with therapy or running, just like having that awareness of what you're doing and why you're doing it, that mindfulness, I guess, put another way. Cool. Well, it's not, I mean, we could go on and on, but
Definitely.
as we tie things together here, definitely want to know where people can learn more about you. Obviously follow you on Instagram and everything, which seems to be your main platform. You're pretty prolific there, and do a lot of awesome stories, outdoors and whatnot, which is cool to watch and follow. And then what about Microcosm Coaching? Where can people learn about that?
Yeah. So, in terms of Microcosm, you guys, if you're interested, microcosmcoaching.com. And we've got great coaches, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you want to follow my adventures, it's TJ Skis on Instagram. Not a big Facebook or Twitter guy, kind of just on
Cool.
Instagram.
Yeah, and what is, I mean, I know what microcosm means, but what's the story behind the name there?
I think it's, for us, it's about looking at how does training relate to life.
So training is like a little microcosm of life.
It can be, because
Yeah,
I think life is process oriented, and training is a great way to, on a daily basis, understand that life is process, life is unfolding just in the same way that training is. And maybe, showing up every day, being really good at showing up every day in your life, being really good at showing up every day in training, accepting the fact that your best changes from day to day, and that's okay. Um, we really like to use running or training as a space for understanding that, and then applying those same principles to your day to day.
cool. Well, I was going to ask you for last words of wisdom, but I think you beat me to that. I really like how, using your, I mean, I'll paraphrase or reiterate what you just said and what I heard, like using your activities, what you're engaged with in life, and translating your passion, your mindfulness in what you're doing to the rest of your life, because I hear people say, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So let's do everything the best we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks again for your time, TJ, and peace and love until next time.
Thanks so much. That's great.
Cool.